Oh, oh boy, are you in for a treat today. Timothy L. Campbell is someone that has worked in a lot of different jobs, and you'll hear how he started as a biologist, but that led him to preserving Walt Disney's animation collection. Oh, he later worked for Blizzard. He currently works at a museum, at the Laguna Art Museum, preserving art and putting art on loan. And I mean, he'll explain all these things, but I look at all the different methods to preserving animation art and what are the proper ways, what are the bad things to do. And sometimes I'll read these articles, and this name kept popping up, Timothy L. Campbell. So I reached out to him and I said, would you want to come on the show? He said, sure. And I think you're really going to enjoy this. I was going through your resume and I was looking at some of the other jobs you've held, and you've actually went through some different career changes. Did you actually go to school to be a biologist?
I did. I have a degree in biology, a bachelor's with emphasis in marine biology. Yes.
That's quite the change. How did you get interested in art?
Well, so I will say that while I worked to work my way through college with that degree, I worked for the biology department. And one of the things I worked with was the fish specimen collection. So there were jars with fish and formaldehyde and labels and names and things to keep in order. And I think that was sort of my first, I didn't know it at the time, but step towards museum work and caring for collections of things. But while I was finishing my degree, I had a summer job at a place that was called at the time the Orange County Marine Institute, where we were teaching junior college classes, high school classes, and summer camps about marine biology and oceanography. And I'd been doing that for a few years, and they changed their mission a little bit and started teaching more history stuff that I was not interested in. So I had to find a different summer job. And I was at that time during the summers living at home with my parents. And I had procrastinated and not found a summer job. And my mom said, well, she read in the paper that the Bowers Museum was expanding and maybe they needed some help while they were doing their thing. And I called up and said, well, I'm a student looking for a summer job. Do you have anything? And I got passed to their acting director and she said, where do you go to school? And I said, Occidental College. And she goes, oh, do you know Dr. Stevens? And I said, yeah, Doc's my advisor. And she said, come on in, we'll find you something to do. So I started off doing data entry in an effort to transfer their information from a card catalog file, 3x5 cards, into their first database. And so I ended up retyping descriptions of 1/3 of 70,000 objects and learning a lot about the collection in the process and getting kind of introduced to how museums work and what they do and how to care for artwork. And it was really addictive. And so I didn't turn back from that. That was the
So
start.
this goes back to 80s, 90s, roughly there.
Yeah, I started at the Bowers in '89. Yeah.
Must have been a lot harder without a lot of internet opportunities to Google search things.
None. And in fact, the application, that first database application, I was looking at an amber screen with no graphic user interface. Everything's just text, So yeah, I'm a dinosaur like that.
I am very impressed. The way I found out about you, much like a lot of other animation cell collectors, is when they're Google searching it and looking online about how to better preserve cells. There was I think, a master's degree paper written about the preservation of animation cells, and you were one of the people quoted in it. It was around 2006, I think, that came out, and that was right at the tail end of your time with Disney,
Right.
preserving some of the animation art for Walt Disney. And you came up with the best parts of it, really talking about the methods used to help preserve some of the oldest animation art. What was that like working for Disney and being surrounded by some of the most well-known pieces of animation art?
Yeah, it was unexpectedly wonderful for me. So I had worked with cultural and folk art at the Bowers. I had ended up moving to Japan for a couple of years, and I worked with collections there that were more archaeology and anthropology collections. And then when I moved back, I had the opportunity I needed work. And through connections that I had, I got the opportunity to come on for a project for Disney to move the animation art collection, rehouse it, reorganize it. So the animation research library was a split off from the studio archives. And they were, at the time I came on board, sharing storage space with the folks that had the cells for the gallery stores that were in malls at the time. And that was being pushed out, and the Animation Research Library was going to take over that whole building. And what we were going to do is go through and empty out one room of all the artwork, go through and get rid of acidic cardboard and nasty rubber bands and paper clips and all the things that were damaging the art, put them into acid-free materials and materials that I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit. And they would put in a compact shelving system into that room so that we could fit more material, and we would work our way through the building one room at a time, and it was supposed to be a one-year project.
Wow.
That's what I was
Okay.
originally hired for.
A 1-year project. So
Yeah.
if I'm looking correctly, 97 to 06.
Correct.
Was there still work to be done in 06 when you left?
There will always be work to be done.
Yeah.
It's a giant retrospective project, but they're making art always, so there's
Sure.
always new material to keep up with. So yeah, so while we were doing that project that I mentioned, Disney as a company decided they needed to move KABC television, and where they needed to move KABC television was the building we've been working in. So before my year completed, we had to start planning a second project, which was a relocation. And I got to consult with the architects and the Disney team on building the first facility that was designed to store that collection.
That's really cool. And for the most part, you're surrounded by, one-of-a-kind artwork that is recognized across the world. Did it feel strange being able to witness these things? Like, did it feel weird, or did it feel like a commodity? Like, did it just feel like average? Like, oh, okay, this is just what it is.
Right. So that's what I had started to say and lost my thought there. But so I'd worked with cultural art, I'd worked with anthropological art to come, I thought at first, not having had a background with Disney art, that I was not going to be as fascinated by drawings and paintings that were of a more or less commercial nature, like you said, right? But immediately that was dispelled. I mean, once I started to see concept art, story sketches, rough animation, layout drawings, paintings, background paintings, cells, all of that material, and all of the parts of it that are leading up to the final product, leading up to that painted cell against a painted background, and realizing not only the beautiful work that was done, but also the incredible insight into American culture from the 20s through the present. I was overwhelmed and fell in love with it all immediately. So
it's amazing.
Yeah.
When you hear about some of the extreme lengths people go through to preserve, like people that collect wine, I mean, they will spend a fortune for their wine cellars and things like that. What types of things do the architects have to go through in order to make a specific building to help preserve this art? Like, what are the great lengths that are only found in buildings like that?
Right. Well, we talk a lot about climate control, right? Temperature and humidity affect a lot of materials in negative ways. And so trying to mitigate that or control that to some extent is a big thing. Fire suppression is huge. Security is huge. And we took that from, the most basic consideration to, I remember conversations where we said, well, if they drove a tank through the wall, what would happen? Yeah, everything is considered.
That's quite a contingency plan. So what do we do when the tanks start rolling?
Right. Well, a helicopter crash. We talked about every extreme
earthquake,
wildly imaginable. Yeah. Well, that was a mild scenario, right? Earthquake.
Right.
Yeah.
Somewhat realistic,
Yeah. So we had that came into play. Like, okay, we have these compact rolling shelves, and I don't know if you know what I mean when I'm talking about that, but they use them in libraries and things as well, where you'll have a room, and rather than having a row of shelves, a row of shelves, a row of shelves, a row of shelves, and an aisle between each one of those all the time, you can pack more into the room if you put those rows of shelves on tracks, where you can roll them side to side. So you only really need one aisle, and you might have 20 rows of shelving. So
I went to Central Michigan University in the early 2000s, and the library was brand new. I think they opened it in 2000, and they had those different bookshelves where you can press a button and they would roll. So,
Right.
to be able to store more in there. And
Right.
sometimes you would go into the library just to push the button because it was a nice novelty to see a whole row of books slowly
Right.
move.
Right. So, well, right. We didn't, at the time I was there anyway, we didn't opt for the power assist movement. We had a crank so you could move the shelves. But that's if we had a power failure, we were concerned about being able to move things around. And it's all, it's another system to maintain that can break. So it was a practical consideration. But
So for
we do consider, like, when you have those tracks, you have to do certain earthquake seismic preparation mitigations to make sure that those won't, become affected and not roll after the fact.
Oh
So
yeah. I mean, if they're designed to move, and there's going to be times where you don't want them to move. So what do you do in
right,
those times? Yeah,
right,
that's a big consideration,
yep,
considering how fragile some of these older animation cells are. And I think so many people have a fascination, the ones that collect with Disney and the older ones, and they understand some of the different preservation methods that over time realized they were such the wrong way to handle it. I've seen people talk about they would laminate some of the old artwork, and I guess the idea was to keep air out of it, but now it's like, of course, you go back and look at it and they're crumbling and it didn't preserve the way they thought. So there was
right,
different methods. It makes me wonder how many different styles you've seen through an archive like that.
right. Well, there were more times where I saw that things that hadn't had any effort made that needed help than there were things where I saw bad decisions made, I suppose. But if we're talking specifically about cells or cell setups, um, that's a really challenging one because the issues are deformation of the plastic through interaction with the surrounding environment, right? Because if you have the older ones where they're nitrate cells, certain things are going to happen. If you have acetate cells, something else is going to happen. And then you have the binding of the paint onto that surface and the failure of binding of the paint onto that surface, and those are the things that go wrong, right? So your challenges are keeping it in a climate where those things are less likely to happen. And I guess there's also light damage as a possibility as well. But those are, once that damage has started to occur, then your options are really limited as to what you can do. Yeah. And I always talk about, so there's preservation, there's conservation, and then there's restoration, right? Preservation is non-invasive. You're doing what you can with the conditions to keep things from happening in the first place or from getting worse. Conservation, you may have to do something where there is a physical, like you're adding a new binding agent onto the paint to keep it together. You're doing something that might be somewhat invasive, but you're trying to not alter the artwork from its current appearance. And then restoration is when you're trying to make something look new again.
There's no turning back though. Once they go bad, is there any top secret techniques that once things start to turn, there's like, oh, there's something you can do, but from what I understand, there's really nothing you
Well,
can do.
yeah, like I say, so if your paint's starting to fall off, the best you can do is apply a layer of something that's going to keep the paint together, right? But as far as that physical interaction of the paint sticking to the acetate, that's tough. I guess you can also add an adhesive, but once you start adding these things, its colors start to change. The being able to say this is the thing that was shot by the camera, it starts to look different than that, right? And that's not what you're going for. So
Yeah.
yeah, there are that's one of the hardest, if you've got a work of art on paper and it's stained, there are things you can do. If you've got its hair, you can mend its hair. If you've got a painting, those things are true. But the things that go wrong mechanically with paint on plastic are
Oh yeah. Well, you've worked with all different types of mediums,
yeah.
probably some, I can't even imagine how old. I've gone to the art museum here in St. Louis, and I guess the definition of art is a little bit more broad because they'll have like, here's an old teapot from 25 BC or something like that, and that'll be part of the art museum's exhibits. So for the sake of what we're talking about, animation, film, things like that, not oil paintings, but I'm assuming you've seen some really old pieces of production art that was used for some sort of entertainment purposes. Are you ever surprised that some hold up so well? Like, have you ever looked at a piece and like, I can't believe this is in such good shape, or are pretty much all the 100-year-old pieces disintegrating?
No, I mean there are things in the Disney collection that are in amazing shape. With we started with the earliest things in that collection that I worked with were Steamboat Willie playing Crazy, right? So
So you've seen those.
I've handled them. Yeah, yeah.
What was that like? How big were they? How big were the cells then that they were using?
Those are like, I'm trying to remember the terminology, right? So there's 10 field, 12 field, 16 field, right? Where you're talking
Yeah.
about the size of the shot through the camera. They were on the smaller size. Yeah, they're 12, maybe 12 field.
Like, is it the size of a head? Like, what would you
Oh,
compare it to?
smaller than an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper by a little bit.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
gotcha. So
yeah,
you handled those. Wow.
yeah. No, I had amazing experiences there and opportunities there. Handling the glass plates from the multi-plane cameras. Um,
Wow.
and my role, I was really fortunate. When we loaned things to museums, I got to be the courier a lot of the times. So, we did that show at the Grand Palais in 2006, I guess it was, which was the Il était une fois Walt Disney, Once Upon a Time Walt Disney, where they wanted to compare and show sort of European art that might have inspired or been sources for Disney art, right? So they had the, St. Peter or St. George and the Dragon, and you'd have Sleeping Beauty, the dragon, and the prince fighting, right? All of those comparisons. And so I got to take art to France, and that was a lot of fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you fly art, does it get its own seat? How does that work?
Well, it changed after 9/11, of course. So before that, I was able in the old days I would go to the warehouses where crates and things would be palletized and oversee customs looking at it, and then walk out onto the tarmac and watch it get loaded into the plane. And then I'd get on the same plane and go with the art. Later on, I couldn't be as close to it in all of those earlier stages, but I was fortunate a lot of the time in that I'd be like in the terminal at a window watching my stuff go onto the plane. And yeah, I mean, I've ridden in trucks with armed escorts while we took art from the airport in Florida to the St. Petersburg Dali Museum for the Destino artwork. That was a lot of fun.
Wow. So I'm trying to imagine this because they travel with the Stanley Cup, in this giant suitcase, basically, but they try not to label it in a way to
Right.
like tip people off.
Yeah.
So
security through obscurity. Yes.
yeah. So are you like, you hop on a Southwest flight and then you get off, and are you waiting at the carousel for this thing to come around, or is there like some special procedure you can?
There are agents or logistics services that help that are certified to be in the TSA areas that will walk those things out to where I can meet with them. Yeah.
Gotcha.
They're not just popping out with everybody's suitcase. No.
That's good.
Yeah.
Wow. I just the logistics of it, because they're priceless. I mean, there's one of a kind.
I got to be the courier on one trip for a combined shipment with stuff from LA County Museum of Art and stuff from Disney to go to the Pompidou in Paris for an exhibition called Sons et Lumière, Sound and Light. And they wanted to show art from Fantasia, of course, because what better art of sound and light example can you think of than the movie Fantasia? But that one, the stuff coming from LACMA was large, and it had to go into a cargo plane where the nose of the plane opens up and they load the stuff in, and then the nose of the plane closes. And it was me, the pilot, and his wife. And we flew, and then they didn't want that plane coming into Charles de Gaulle, so we had to land in Luxembourg and then get it on a truck and drive it into Paris.
Oh, man, that sounds awesome. It's got to be stressful though, knowing what you know, what's in there.
Oh yeah. There were a lot of late nights, standing somewhere waiting for, guards or a truck or something before I could leave. There were times where I did have things in my hotel room because we had to be somewhere early in the morning with it. And, in Japan that happened for an exhibition. So we went on the news interviewed us, and they wanted some examples of some pieces. So I had to hang.
So for Disney's sake, they were pretty much switching everything over to digital at that point. So what type of like physical materials were they archiving when you were there that was new, or were you only going through what was already in the archives?
No, we were still receiving new material. I mean, the last film, I guess, that I was receiving material from, I left right around the time of the wrap party for Meet the Robinsons.
Mhm.
So that material or Chicken Little or right in there. But there's still concept art. There's still paintings. I mean, I think some of the last most inspiring stuff was now I'm blanking on the name. The really fantastic little short with the cat.
Hmm.
What's his name? With the oh gosh, you know what I'm talking about?
The short with the cat?
Yeah, there's the cat in the window and the oh that's crazy. Um
People are watching
it'll
this right now and they're yelling at their computer.
yeah,
Oh,
it'll come to me. It'll come to me. But
uh-huh.
there were some concept pieces that actually became shot for and then converted in the digital world for the backgrounds where it was black construction paper with colored chalk that was the beams of the street lights.
Hmm.
And it was it, I can't believe I'm blanking on that name.
It'll hit you. And you know what? Mid
It'll hit me like a
sentence, you'll.
brick. Yeah.
But I guess talking to bricks, so you talking about some of the other digital art. I've seen the clay
Lorenzo.
models that they would use for some of
Lorenzo.
these.
Sorry.
What's that?
Lorenzo. The name of the short is Lorenzo.
Lorenzo.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Well, it's better to get it now than later.
Thank you. Yeah. So I interrupted. Sorry about that.
But I've seen some of the models they would use for the characters, for the design, and they're trying to figure out how it would look in a 3D world. I guess this is they probably always 3D print these things now, but would you
The
always
maquettes.
handle flat materials, or would you sometimes have these 3D materials archived?
Yeah, we definitely had maquettes for the characters, and we had the earliest things that are kind of along those lines that we had were, and this was kind of a funny story. There was a period where they redid some of the basement rooms on the studio lot in what was the animation building, and they had some closets and things that hadn't been opened since they'd put in some telephone lines in the 70s that went across the doors of these cupboards. So they opened up the cupboards, and there were these little figures that had been used to create the shadows of the musicians in the Fantasia interstitial shots, and a marionette of Pinocchio that had been used for PR stuff,
Wow.
and some dinosaur models for Fantasia, and just a little treasure trove. Yeah. So those were on the earlier end of that kind of thing, and then there were hand done maquettes, and then later, yeah, there were 3D printed maquettes of different, the busts of characters or full versions of characters, and then another 3D element where there was a collection of, and I don't think I'm telling a secret that I'm not supposed to tell, the Nightmare Before Christmas Jack Skellington heads with the different mouth positions and some of the puppets. So yeah.
That's so cool. And you just stumble upon these things.
Well, no, those were things that we had in the collection. We were challenged with trying to figure out how to preserve. We looked into, for those items, doing closed cases with where you replace the oxygen with nitrogen to cut down on deterioration.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of science that can go into these things, and with cells too. There are materials called zeolites or molecular traps or molecular sieves that bind with acids as they're off-gassed from cells. And so if you put those in a storage container, because that reaction becomes autocatalytic. So if a cell starts to degrade, the moisture in the air binds with the acetate breaking down to form acetic acid. And the more acetic acid there is in the container, the faster it happens. So if you put these things that bind with the acid and take it out of the equation, then you slow down the deterioration. So that was one of the things we applied.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've seen different methods and people talk about that, and you'll have to help me because I'm a layman with it. But let's see if I got them. I had some over here. Maybe I don't, but people buy those preservation sheets of paper that they put in with the cells. Is that what you're discussing? You're talking about?
That is a variety of things that are sold that way. I think there's an older, like the silver tarnish paper that they used to use as well. And I don't think that does the same thing at all. So there are papers that are buffered or unbuffered. So they'll have a higher or lower pH, which are also used in storing a lot of these materials. And that does part of what we're talking about. But then there are some specialty products where they've bound these naturally occurring elements into it that do a higher grade job of binding with acids.
Right. Yeah. I thought I had some right here in my stack of junk, but it's more hidden than I thought. For like an average collector, someone that is not handling, 100-year-old Disney materials, or someone that just enjoys, like for me, I love the 80s and 90s cartoons, and I love
Mhm.
collecting the production art from that. And it's just fun thing to do. I like going online and seeing what people are posting or what they're selling or whatever it is. And a lot of the times there's just disagreements on what's the best way to preserve these things in certain collections. Um, some of the things I've heard, maybe I can tell you some of the things I've heard, and you can tell me if that's maybe like a Mythbusters edition of the
Okay.
interview. But some people have said that after a certain year, they started using different materials in the actual celluloid, and it made it more durable, meaning that you didn't have to go through extreme precautions. So they said some people like to air their cells out, make sure that some of the gases don't get trapped in the bags that they're being stored in. They said that's totally unnecessary anymore because the newer cells don't really require those sort of things. But I still find myself doing it once a year. I just go through and I let them sit out for 24 hours just to be safe.
When you
Is it
do
stuff
that,
like,
is there an odor when you take them out of the bag?
um, you know, sometimes there's a slight, sometimes there's not. It just depends. It's hard for me to tell if I'm smelling something that is natural versus occurred because it's been, building up in a bag.
So when, like I say, when it's acetate and when it's breaking down, it forms acetic acid, which smells like vinegar. So if
Right.
you get the vinegar smell, that's what that is.
Right.
I don't know when or if they came up with, because we're talking about traditional animation, the periods we're talking about it being done, the earliest stuff was nitrate, the later stuff is safety film or acetate, right?
Mhm.
And then I don't think there was a change after that that I'm aware of. So
Yeah, I'm not sure. I thought I'll have to go back and take some notes, but
yeah,
at some point I was reading people were making that argument. They were saying that some maybe it was higher quality or something that they used when I'm just trying to remember, but I maybe I shouldn't even have brought it up as an example. But
well,
in
yeah,
general, is it a good idea to air out your cells?
well, as I say, so the accumulation of that off gas material in a closed space is going to cause the reaction to happen faster. So I guess, yeah, maybe it is a good idea.
Okay, occasionally.
It's yeah, it's extra handling, which puts it at risk, but you probably want to handle it and look at it anyway if you own it. So
Some people store theirs vertically as opposed to horizontally. Do you know if it makes a difference?
are we talking about a single cell here or what are we talking about?
We're talking about, so let's say you put them in a cell binder
Okay.
to like store them like an art binder. And sometimes people, I've seen a couple of methods where they will open it up so the actual sleeves are almost like free floating. And they say for some reason that helps because you're not putting any pressure on it if you were to stack these things vertically and lay them horizontally.
Right. Well, putting weight on them, putting pressure on them definitely will have an impact over time. Um, but other than that, I doubt that the simple effect of gravity is going to have I could be proven wrong, but I wouldn't expect there to be a significant difference in lifespan of a cell stored vertically versus horizontally if you're not talking about applying pressure to it.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think I
Unless
read in
unless
that.
you're seeing things actually start to delaminate, and if the paint's already starting to detach from the cell, then maybe you do want to give it that little bit of edge against gravity.
Yeah.
But
Well, like if I remember in I don't know if it was the Disney studio, but that one paper that was written in 2006. So when you're talking about the drawers that some of these are stored in, would they stack some of the cells on top of each other, just maybe like 5 or 6 of them or something along those
we
lines?
came up with some custom storage methods at
Yeah.
Disney for that stuff. So we because you have a lot of cells to do a scene, right? Depending on the length of the scene, and we wanted to keep them together so that you have to make certain compromises in storage. So we wanted to keep things maybe in the same box, but we created some folders that had basically like a matte window through the middle of it, which is
Mhm.
where most of your paint's going to occur on cells. And but it created it had an edge, a spine that would keep the pressure off the surface of the cells. We would
Mhm.
only stack as many in there as would be relieved by the width of that spine, and then we would stack these folders together in the box. So it
That's cool.
greatly relieved that issue of pressure. And we
Oh,
would
that's cool.
interleave the cells with polyethylene sheets or Dartex sheets or some other polyethylene or polypropylene plastic that would allow us to kind of see through, but would not encourage adhesion between one cell and the next cell.
Wow. So what's the perfect temperature to keep your cells?
Well, the most significant thing I would say is minimizing rapid change of temperature.
Hmm.
uh, you can kind of, things will kind of settle in at a temperature. We always tried in the vaults at Disney, I think the set point was 60 degrees. In museum settings for most artwork, we try for between 65 and 70 for storage. But the most significant thing, like I say, is that it's not going up and down in rapid increments, because it's the main issue in all of these things is moisture being drawn out by a rapid drying, and that temperature and relative humidity are highly related, interrelated concepts. So when you do a drop in temperature, you change the humidity in the thing, and that affects anything that's hygroscopic. So
Interesting.
yeah.
I've heard that some of the older Disney works, they used to cut the cells before releasing them, as in they wouldn't leave them in their entirety. They would just kind of like, I don't know, keep the character intact. So in the archives, were you looking at full pieces or were you sometimes looking at cropped pieces?
It was almost all in complete shape. They'd have the holes for registration for the putting it on the camera.
Yeah,
So they were
that's pretty
all
cool.
whatever the field size for the background they were going to go with, kind of thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Have you
There were
ever
funny stories. There were funny stories about, because there were periods of time where Disney and everybody else was saying, the cost of real estate and space to store things is really expensive. Do we really need to keep these things, right? And so in the 70s, a lot of the animation studios, Warner Brothers, everybody, they chucked cells. And we had an occasion where Chuck Jones came and visited before he passed away at the Animation Research Library, and we were talking about this stuff. And he said, at that time, he said, if there's original Bugs Bunny cells, it's because I had them at home. The rest of it's under the 101 freeway, right?
mm,
So, but Disney was really very good about it. But there were periods where cells are sort of one of the more prolific, the animation drawings in the cells that are 1-to-1, right? And there's so many per second, and it's a lot when you start talking about an entire film. They didn't keep all the cells, right? So there were stories where they would take a stack of cells, score it with a razor blade, and throw it in the dumpster. And
mm.
then there were funny stories I heard from older Disney security guards who would say, I remember that one artist who would come around after that and dumpster dive and pull out stuff, and he's got a great collection now. That kind of thing. But yeah.
That happens. Like even in radio, which is my field, where radio stations back when physically you'd have to have the medium on tapes or whatever on reel to reel,
Yeah.
it just the storage was impossible. So they would toss it, and then the employees would dumpster dive in order to try to save and preserve some of that.
Right.
It's like that in some other fields too. And
Yeah.
you're talking to Chuck Jones. I From what I understand, artists would come to the archives and they would study the artwork that's there. I've
That
heard
was
that's pretty common.
that was one of the main reasons for the existence of the department I worked for. Yeah. You're doing a new movie about dogs. Come look at the artwork from Lady and the Tramp, 101 Dalmatians, Rescuers, and figure out how that works. And it saves all kinds of time in training new artists. It inspires them. It moves things along, and that was the most important role I think we were filling there. Secondarily, we would do 300 projects a year for 100 different divisions of Disney, where they wanted reference to see what color is something supposed to be, how big is something compared to something else, directly reproducing artwork on packaging or as a mural on a cruise ship or something for a parade. Disney is really great about wanting to stay true to those designs, and so that
Yeah.
was the thing. And we did a project where some films were being re-released on IMAX, right?
Hmm.
And they did a first pass, and they said, it doesn't look as good on the big giant screen. Let's go back and rescan original drawings and paintings to make it look like it's supposed to look, and so at a higher resolution.
Hmm.
So we were pulling old artwork for that project too. I mean, there were a lot of really great things that were done with that art.
So is it possible that they reanimated based on using some of that old cell, or were they using that as like the launching point to try to get it as close as possible, to mimic it as close as possible?
Well, for the IMAX project, it was, we're making the same movie, so we're reusing the stuff to do the same thing we did with it the first time. For the artists that are coming for reference and inspiration, it's not a reproduction. It's like we're doing our own thing, but we wanted to see how this is done before, so that we can kind of keep in the style, but also, like I said, save the learning curve. What do a dog's legs look like when it's running? There's so many fantastic examples. Why not take advantage of that?
It's hard to time that stuff out without knowing what it looks like. And who better to learn than from some of these artists that made masterpieces like in that collection? That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
I do want to talk more about this, but I got another question now. So after Disney, you worked with Blizzard,
that's right.
and
Yeah,
then later you also worked with colleges about preserving art.
yeah, a little bit of that.
So you did a couple of other things. You talked about what's the smell of the cell? Can you smell it when you open it up? Is
Right.
that the only artwork you smell, or are there other artworks that you're like, I need to give this a quick sniff to see? Like, is that kind of like a hidden, like it's almost like a trick that only an expert level preserver would know about? Like,
that's
would you
that's
use
funny.
your sense in any other art medium?
The sense of smell, right? That is funny. Well, I mean, that has certainly come up post Disney, where I'm looking at a piece and I smell that vinegar smell, and I know that's acetic acid, and I know what components of that artwork to look at to see what's going wrong. Um, the nitrate stuff, I should say too, just because I think it's funny. So if they describe acetate degrading as vinegar smell, the nitrate smell is described as rotting meat or sweat socks.
Mm.
So that one, you also, when you smell it, you know it. Um, but and you do find nitrate, cellulose nitrate stuff in the oldest plastics. So I remember seeing and smelling it with some like old plastic combs, decorative combs for hair, that were made out of that sort of tortoiseshell looking old cellulose nitrate plastic. So
Hmm.
yeah, I can't think of any other like unique triggering smells, but there may be some. Yeah. When you're looking at art to see what's going wrong with it, it's definitely an all senses on deck kind of thing.
So Blizzard is known, at least for me, as a video game company.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. But
So
they started off, porting games to Super Nintendos, and there are drawings going back 20 years for characters and for backgrounds and for,
hmm,
there's concept art, there's story sketches, there's some of the same elements. And then when you get to where they're doing cinematics, there's a lot of the same elements. And yeah, so I was hired on as a curator there to do kind of a three-pronged job. One is to collect and preserve the art within the company. Two was to do interior displays of that artwork to again inspire artists that were newly hired to the style that they were becoming a part of, and to provide reference. And then third, to do external displays of the artwork to promote the company and the art
man.
to the public. So, my last two great projects there were for Blizzard were an exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Taipei, Taiwan, where we had 1,000 people a day for 60 days looking at Blizzard art, about 800 pieces of Blizzard art, and then a loan to the Smithsonian for their video game exhibition.
Oh wow, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
To me, this seems like a dream job, is preserving history, and to do it in such a fun way because there's so much history to preserve. I guess I
yeah,
didn't realize Blizzard was doing Super Nintendo games. I just think of them as a computer, a PC creator of video games. But there would have to be a lot of art that
yeah.
goes into creating a game with designing all the different artwork for it. And That
Yep.
even changed a lot, from Super Nintendo on after that. Uh,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
that's remarkable. That's got to be fun though. Is it tedious at all, or is it just like, because for me, I spent a lot of time archiving audio for radio stations, and trying to hold on to any bit of radio history that I can find or get a hold of, and then I would use them to create these radio documentaries. And I had so much fun learning what I learned from listening to the audio, and then using that as a way to interview old timers in the industry, to talk to them about things that either they forgot about or they thought no one else in the world knew about.
That sounds great.
I loved it.
Yeah.
So this has got to be such a cool gig. I didn't even know preserving art was a job you can have. Like, is this something that's only in California?
No, 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 by no means. Although, if we're talking about animation, a lot of it comes from here, so a lot of it stayed in the area. But there are great articles about preserving animation art, even from the Indianapolis Museum of Art. I think it's got a classic one about some Snow White art from an exhibition they did that I used as a reference. There are people who love and collect animation art all over the world. So wherever it is, people need to be taking care of it. Things are going to happen. People see something turning yellow or something starting to fall apart.
Yeah.
So there are conservators everywhere. Not all of them are familiar with and know how to deal with these particular forms of art, but there are networks to find those people from wherever you are. So, but collections of entertainment art, California is a great place to be for that. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there any, well, because I mean, Disney made so many different shorts. Are there any pieces of art that are completely lost to time? Things that technically should be in the archives, but were never found?
Not that I would put that way. There were individual drawings or individual paintings where one thing or another had happened in the decades where it's not there anymore. There was a period where they sold original background paintings as parts of cell setups with Sotheby's to promote the release of a few films, I think in the 80s and 90s, right? So those things are no longer with the company. Until Little Mermaid era, I think it wasn't explicitly in the contracts of the artists that Disney owned everything, right? So artists might have been working on things at home or at the studio that ended up with them when they left the company. But there's a little thing that Walt did where he's talking about the morgue. I think it goes along with it was right around again Sleeping Beauty production time, and he's talking about if we stretched out all of these drawings that we've kept here, it would reach to the moon or around the world twice or whatever he says. But he foresaw this use of the material for reference and inspiration, and it was his vision that caused that first morgue department to be created. And then I think you can find it on something that there's a Terry the Squirrel, one of those wildlife adventure short things, and like Wonderful World of Disney productions. And I think as an intro piece to that, there's this thing that Walt did talking about the morgue that's really great.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's been a few years since I looked at it, but yeah, it's fun.
Wow.
But yeah, I wrote an article about the different forms of art that we were keeping and the conservation issues that commonly came up. What might have staple holes in it and what would have different things going wrong with it for the Western Association for Art Conservation, which is one of these networks of conservators. And I got to go give a talk at a conference to other conservators who were interested in that. And we also I did an article with a colleague, Diane Pulano, about a project that we did, the background paintings for some of the pan scenes, right? Where the action goes along a long painting. They had paintings that were up to 110 inches long in some cases, right? Where they'd stitched pieces of paper together with the watercolor painting on it or a gouache painting. And in the old days, they took those, they'd peeled the top layer off the illustration board that had the painting, and they'd roll them up, and they were storing them originally in old ice cream buckets because they were wax lined and would protect the painting from moisture in the basement of the building on the studio lot, right? And so there were a couple thousand background paintings that had been rolled up from the 30s, 40s, 50s that we wanted to unroll. And so we consulted with conservators at, the Balboa Art Conservation Center, LA County Museum of Art, the Getty, and we came up with a plan where we built a chamber where we would humidify them and relax the fibers and then dry them between particular materials. And then we built these special sleeves to store them in.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's, there was, again, that's the arts, it's the science, it's the making things that had been inaccessible, accessible, because there's a demand, there's an interest, people love the stuff, and the company is using it. That's why Disney will put the resources and the money into storing and saving this stuff, is because, for them, it continues to create revenue, but also it's this amazing history and art. And that's the great part, is they will loan to museums, and they will loan to or make accessible to authors who are writing publications about the history and the beauty and the art. So
it's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow, what a story. Keeping them in ice cream bucket things.
Right.
So that has to be stressful too when you're researching these things, not knowing if it's going to work or not. So you probably have to be very strategic in the pieces you decide to experiment on.
Yeah.
Because okay, you're like, well, we're going to use these over here. We're not going to use these. We'll test with these.
There was one that makes me think of something that was really, so when we planned that new building, one of the things they wanted to know is what percentage of the material might be nitrate, right? Because nitrate cells are a huge fire hazard, right? Because nitrate cells at some temperature like 98 or 100 degrees can spontaneously combust, right? So they wanted to know how much of that do you have, because it's going to change the architectural requirements for this building and the vaults that we're going to build. We need to know what you got. So we had to figure out how to do an assessment. We know about what decade, where they stopped switching over, but where they started switching over, stopped using nitrate, but there were probably backstocks of materials. So we wanted to really be able to identify and make some estimates. But what we found was that what was great is they used to use blank sheets a lot of the times as dust covers, right? So we would take these blank sheets of plastic that had distinctly different kinds of aging showing, so they'll cockle along the edges, or they'll get cockling and ripples through the middle, and one's probably one kind of plastic and one's probably the other, and could we prove that, right? So we would take these dust covers that didn't have any art, so we weren't destroying any artwork, and we'd cut strips off of them and take them out into the parking lot and light them on fire to see what would happen, right? And the nitrate would burn like a quick fuse.
Sure.
Right? The acetate would melt a little bit, and we go, okay, that's this style of warping. When we see this is the acetate, this is the safety film, this stuff is the nitrate, this is the stuff we really need to tally up and count and see what we have to do. And we were fortunate or unfortunate in that there was a lot less of the nitrate, so a lot less of the early stuff.
But in 80s cop movies, they would always stick their pinky in the cocaine, and then the detective would
right.
Yeah, that's Colombian. So if I were you, I would change that story and say you could tell just by little tongue dip.
Right. Well, we've already said I could tell a lot by the smell, but yeah,
that's part of it too.
Right.
Wow. Oh, that's just amazing. I think that so many people are just they have in their mind a vision of what this would look like, and all the treasures that would be inside of there. And for some people, it's got to be like, if you're a bank teller and you're handing out hundreds all day, you stop looking at it as money at some point. Did you ever stop looking at it as art? Can that even possibly happen in a job like that?
No, I mean, so, if we're talking about where I've got hundreds and hundreds of boxes with hundreds and hundreds of folders, maybe, or let's say 20 to 60 or 80 folders that each contain 100 to 300 or 500 animation drawings, where it's literally each motion of each character in each scene, the volume became overwhelming. When we got to so as I said, we got to the middle of my 1-year project and figured out that we were going to have to move the collection. So we were told, we're going to spend a year creating a new building, and at the end of the year, you're going to have 3 weeks to move, right? And so we had 50,000 boxes, plus the objects, the dimensional objects, the maquettes that we talked about, the glass plates, all that kind of stuff. So the team of people, the really great people that I worked with, and we sat down and we mapped out shelf to shelf for the shelves we knew were going to be built on the other end, where those 50,000 boxes were going to go. This shelf needs to be this high, this shelf needs to be this high, through the 9 rooms that we're going to put it in the new building. And so that, that became, at that point, I'm not thinking about it as artwork. At that point, I'm thinking about it as boxes and folders and sheets. But, we estimated it was probably 60 million individual pieces of art. Right.
Wow, that's
So
amazing. Moving that, you ever seen the videos when they're moving the space shuttle Challenger down the road and they're like so careful in the way they're moving it in some
yeah,
of these like side areas? That's how I imagine trying to move all that art. It's like you just got a large bulk of it and you're
that's how I
just so
felt about it.
careful.
That's how I felt about it at the time, for sure.
Did I know that in the advent of DVDs, there's a lot of special features. Did any of the re-release DVDs of the Disney movies come to the archives looking for like drawings or
Yeah,
things to be included?
that was always something we were involved with. Yeah.
So would you find things for them? Like they would say, hey, we're going to make this and we need like
So,
10 drawings or something like that.
right. So our team at that time was broken down into 3 categories. We had exhibitions, research, and collections. So the researchers were the ones who were basically like a curator in a museum. They had the intellectual academic knowledge of the films. So if somebody came to the department with a request about what they needed, the researchers were the ones that could know what movie they needed to go for that, and mostly who were the artists that did it, and all that great intellectual property end of it. The collections team, we were worried about the temperature, the fire suppression, the climate control, the what kind of materials, what size boxes, how are we going to effectively, efficiently care for this material. And then the exhibitions team did throughout the Disney studios, offices, art working areas for the films, for production areas. Also in the theme parks, we did a lot of supplying of visuals.
Hmm.
So, we were doing artists would be working on Atlantis, and our department themed out their work area with nautical, ship's wheels and nets and, various things like that. And when it was Home on the Range, it was Western themed, we set up a saloon with props, just to kind of create the vibe. And then we installed things in the California Adventure Animation Pavilion. We did a couple times, we did Main Street store windows with things to promote the films. We used to do the Florida animation studio corridor tour props as well. So
Yeah, my family, we went to Disney in Florida last year. We stayed at Art of Animation. So beautiful. You get to see, all the different artwork and things and up on the wall, which is kind of cool. And it gives you an opportunity to talk to your kids about this. Like, oh,
yeah,
there's a lot of effort that goes into making these. You don't really think about it. You've watched Frozen 80 times, but or go
yeah,
back and watch some of these things. It's not just a catchy song, It's
yeah.
have you ever did Disney save a lot of concept art? And did you ever come across concept art for a film and it's totally different than what made the film? Like, have you ever seen
Yep.
things that are like, wow, this is like so different?
That was some of my favorite stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are some really great things from Peter Pan.
Hmm.
There's some great sequences that weren't done that I will remember always. And there were funny little things from Snow White.
Hmm.
Yeah, there were definitely. And, when they approached concept art, or visual development, it seemed like, and I'm pretty sure this is what happened. They'd say, hey, you 5 or 6 artists, we're going to make this movie about mermaids. Go draw mermaids and come back and we'll get together and see what we like out of what you guys did. And we'll look at all your different styles,
Mhm.
And so those things where it looks nothing like what ended up on screen, but it's
Wow.
amazing art from these different people with their incredible talents. That was, yeah, I mean, that's where I feel I was most lucky, is in getting to see that stuff.
So you're with the Laguna Art Museum now, is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Awesome. What do you do now?
I am the collections and registration manager, as my new title as of like 2 weeks ago, but I was
Ah,
registrar before that and collections manager before that. So we have, 5,000 objects, and they have numbers and locations, and we loan them, and we also borrow things from private collectors and other museums to do exhibitions. And so all of that tracking of things coming in or going out, being stored, being cared for, that's my responsibility.
That's awesome. I lived in Ohio, and the library in Lima, Ohio would let you take out artwork that you can hang on the wall. Isn't that
Whoa,
cool? Like, so in a much smaller scale, they would have different artists or whatever that would make these things, and the library would collect them. And if you wanted to, for a month, hang something up on your wall, you can do that and then switch it out with something else. It was
that's
like,
fun.
so here I was in my apartment, eating ramen noodles with a nice little beautiful painting that someone made, that, up on the wall, and I'd switch it out every month.
Huh,
I
that's
think
cool.
might
Yeah,
be where the first time I'd hung something on my wall that wasn't a poster, from college or
right,
something like that.
right.
Um, so when you loan things out, it's kind of interesting because, I think about it on a much smaller scale, but are you basically trading with other museums? Is that how that business works when you're trying to
No,
refresh in some art?
not usually. I mean, I suppose that's a nice thought. But museums they have a mission. Each museum has a mission it's trying to fulfill. Our mission has to do with California art specifically. So we want to showcase artists who, lived here or worked here for a significant chunk of their career or were inspired by something uniquely Californian. And so, we have an upcoming exhibition, for example, about photographer William Mortensen, right? And so we want to show a nice diverse range of materials showing his work. So we own maybe 3 pieces, but we want to have a show that's going to have 80, 100 pieces in it. So we reach out to other institutions or individuals that we know collect, and if they have something that they own and it's part of their mission to see that it gets seen by the public, we're providing them with an opportunity to fill their mission as well, right?
Hmm.
So likewise, if another museum is doing a show and they want to show artwork from Southern California from the 1930s, and they have a certain amount, but they'd like to get more, and we happen to collect some artists that they also want to show, they send us a letter saying, can we borrow these things from you? And most of the time that's something that helps us fulfill our mission as well. So we make a loan to them.
That's cool.
Yeah.
In the movies, they always show someone, trying to do a big art heist. Is that a real thing? And if that's such a thing, like, do museums talk to each other if something happens where there's like pieces that go missing?
Right. Well, yeah, I haven't had any in my working with museums since 1989, basically, or with art collections in entertainment or wherever, and making loans to museums. I haven't had to deal, knock on wood, with
Good.
a problem with theft. But those are things we take into consideration. And so there are so anytime we're making one of these loans, any institution, we have a loan agreement form that details the things that are going to be done to take care of security for this item that I'm loaning to you, the things you're going to do to protect it from, again, climate, temperature, humidity, from handling, who's going to ship it and pack it, who's going to return it. Does it require, a camera on it at all times? Does it require a hardwired thing so that if it got lifted off the wall, a bell would ring? I have done all of those things. All of those things are things I have experience with. Yes, the
Yeah.
audible alarm included. So
This is totally different than what we were talking about, but when you talk about the different sensors and things that are there, sometimes I was at the art museum, I think in Chicago, and they had, in pretty much every corner, there were like these clear glass tubes, like half a tube, and inside of it, it almost looked like seismology, like,
oh
it
yeah,
almost looked like you're checking for earthquakes. What was
those
that
are
thing in there?
those are hygrothermographs, and
Yeah.
they measure the changes in temperature and humidity. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Well,
Yeah.
it looked like he was recording, like,
Yeah,
old school way.
yes. Now most of us do that with digital equipment, but when I was at the Bowers, we had those. And so what'll happen is, again, so we're making this loan agreement with another institution, and they'll say, I want to see your climate readings for that gallery for the same months of last year that I'm going to loan for this year, because I
Cool.
want to know that you're protecting my stuff.
That's really good. I
Yeah.
want to see the numbers.
Yep.
Um, this is more on the art side, but have you thought about how artificial intelligence could play a factor into art in the future? Because there's all these different organization companies. I think Google's at one, but there's Dolly and some of these other ones that are essentially you type in a prompt but with text and then it generates a photo for it, like
Right.
art or whatever thing. Are you familiar with some of these different
I've
services that they're
I've seen
developing?
some of that on social media. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
do you think about, I guess, artificial intelligence and art in the future? Do you think that perhaps there'll be museum exhibits from computer generated art in the future?
I have no doubt of that. Yeah, I'm sure there will be. Absolutely. How do
That's
I
an
feel about
interesting
it? That's
thought.
another question. um, I for me, my passion, the through line through all of these jobs, is that there are objects or artworks that had an original life, where they were seen by people or used by people, and then they went into a box somewhere maybe, and but they still have something to teach us, or they're aesthetically beautiful, or they can be inspiring or educational. And so my thing is to make them continue to exist and be available and be visible, right? Those are the things that I find rewarding in this job. So, I started off with the fish, right? And then the cultural and folk art, and then the animation art. And now I'm at a fine art museum, but the idea carries through, like, people will gain something by being exposed to this material. And so making it possible for it to survive, not this year and hopefully 20 years from now and maybe even 100 years from now, so that they can continue to inspire and educate people. That's what I love. So
Yeah, it makes me wonder because when I go back and try to explain this to my kid, like here's how they at one point would make animation, one at a time. And it took a lot of time and effort. And it was pretty amazing, all things considered. And now so much of what you watch is digital. It's just done a lot easier.
right.
And it makes me wonder in the future, will there even be physical art the way we look at it today? Or am I going to have to like look at my grandkids and say, there was a time when they would actually take a brush and put it up against a canvas with oils and paints. It's not all done on your tablets. It
Right.
makes me wonder if one day most of what we consume will be digital, and the old school ways, the Bob Rosses of the world, will be foreign.
Right. Well, right. I mean, certainly there's less access to it for young people today than there was when I was
Hmm,
young. And
that's interesting.
I think that's a trend. But I think, like I said, my career, my passion is in trying to make that still be there for people, at least in some instances. But will there be? And I think people value authenticity.
Hmm.
So I think people value something that you can be in a room with and see, or maybe not touch, but maybe touch, depending on what you're talking about. And would you rather go to Hawaii or watch the show about going to Hawaii? You'd rather go to Hawaii. The You're right. More and more is created digitally. More and more at Disney was created digitally. Blizzard, everything was created digitally at the, for the most part. It's not everything, but a lot.
Hmm.
Um, but if you don't have the understanding of the fundamentals of the physical that created the thought processes that you're looking at, I mean, the brush on paper painting something, you're looking at a digital evolution of that. But if there hadn't been that first thing, you would never have gotten to what we have now, right? So,
Yeah.
and if you're an artist working digitally, I think I mean, artists that I speak to, they have a training and an education and an understanding of traditional art, and they've done the physical thing, and it informs them and makes their digital art better. I think that's I think anything that you have firsthand experience, authentic experience with, you have the potential to do a better job when you're working with a surrogate.
Yeah. So,
And I don't know what an AI artist, I guess when the AI artists are actually intelligent, right, and are unique beings with their own personalities, then their
mm,
art will be as worthwhile to preserve as anyone else's art, right?
oh
But when
boy.
it's just something that's being created by a non-thinking machine as a part of an algorithm in response to prompts, I'm less enthusiastic about it as artwork.
There's a what is it called? The Chinese room theory or it's basically a thought experiment. Um, I'm going to get it wrong, but I'm going to say it anyway because I think it may apply here.
Yeah.
So imagine if there's a person that's locked into a room, lonely, just yearns for outside world contact, and all of a sudden a little note slips underneath the door. So the person looks at the note and it's written in Chinese and he doesn't read Chinese, but he's surrounded by a library of books. So he searches the books. He's like, oh, okay, this is written in, Chinese or Mandarin or whatever. So he looks at the book and he tries to find the symbols and he finds them. And then he writes down on the paper the following symbols that go with it, even though he has no understanding of it, slips it underneath the door. Next day, same thing happens. Comes in, comes out, comes in, comes out. He has no idea what he's computing. Now, the person on the other side doesn't know that. The person on the other side thinks that that person knows the foreign language, none the wiser, and feels like they're having a relationship with this person without knowing the person on the other side doesn't actually understand any of the language. So you would look at it from the perspective of the other person and ask, did they actually have a real connection with that person?
Right.
Because to them, it was real. And that brings up the philosophy of, well, that's basically what a computer software does. I mean, they have no idea what the input and output is. It's just what they're programmed to do. But people have these real connections with it. So can that be art with artificial intelligence? Even if the computer has no idea what it's doing, if it makes us feel something or a connection, then by all means, it's real.
I think in those cases, I would say, sure, it's art, but the artist is the programmer.
Yeah, the artist is the programmer.
Yeah.
Well, going back to Disney and Blizzard.
Yeah.
So the mission statement for Disney and the reason why they were preserving their art versus the, I guess, mission statement for Blizzard and the reason why they were preserving their art, was it the same? Did they have the same philosophies of why they wanted to preserve?
I think, well, I can tell you that when Blizzard hired me, it was because they were inspired by what Disney had done and wanted to emulate. So, so yes, they knew if you have all this fantastic art from your history, it can have current value, and knowing what you have, organizing it, making it accessible is a worthwhile endeavor. And whether to what level of success anybody does that is another story. But that intent was the same. Like, okay, we've got great artists, we've been making great art. It doesn't do anybody any good if it just goes in a box in a closet, nobody ever sees it again.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. This is pretty amazing. Any tips for collectors? I mean, you talked about some of the different preservation methods. Any general tips that you would have that we haven't discussed that would be beneficial for someone to hear?
Like I said, so the things that do damage are light, changes in temperature and humidity, and physical impact or pressure or handling. So minimizing those things is the best thing. But again, there's a trade-off. You own the thing, you want to appreciate it, you want to see it, it's beautiful, it doesn't do anybody any good if it's in a box, nobody ever sees it again. So with art in general, I say don't hang it over the fireplace, don't hang it in the bathroom, don't hang it where it gets 4 hours of direct sunlight every day. Use common sense on those kinds of things. And there are materials that you can put with it that will help slow down some of those degradation factors that we talked about. But no, I mean, it's art. It's something that, like I said, serves those purposes of inspiration and aesthetic enjoyment and maybe education. And so I love that people collect this stuff, and I love that they love it and they feel passion for it and want to keep it and want to enjoy it and want to share it with other people. So
with the medium that they're on, like the Steamboat Willie, I'll use that as an example because it's one of the first ones that come to mind when you think about this. How long do you think that'll last, even under the best circumstances? They say that one day, no matter what you do, it'll disintegrate. So how long do you think some of these cells will actually last?
Disney's making the effort. So, and they've always made an effort, right? They used high quality paper for things. They used high quality plastics for things. They used high quality paints. They had artists who were skilled and knew the physical limitations of the materials. So I was looking at stuff that's 100 years old then. I would expect Disney's stuff to be there another 100 years from now.
Okay.
At least most of it, barring the helicopter crash or the cataclysmic earthquake, right?
Oh, so you're saying
Um,
they can't hold up against a tank attack?
right. But if you're conscientiously keeping things at a constant cool temperature, protecting them from light, minimizing handling. One of the things that we were doing while I was there was building up the ability to fulfill those research requests with digital images, right? Because when I first started, um, digital wasn't really a thing, right? And when we were fulfilling requests, we were providing a lot of color photocopies of things, so that
Mm.
required a lot of handling and a lot of exposure to light, but having the advent of digital cameras and good scanners, maybe we had to expose something once and then we could fulfill all of the requests that came after that without having to handle it again.
Mhm.
So that's for those corporate, practical uses, that was a
Yeah.
big step forward.
Just out of curiosity, with Blizzard, you said they ported to the Super Nintendo. What games did they make for them?
So I think the earliest games that we had art for were Rock and Roll Racing,
Hmm.
Blackthorn.
Hmm.
I'm trying to remember some of the other titles. Yeah, if I thought about it, I could have looked some things up. But we did, when we did BlizzCon, the big annual, mostly annual convention at the Anaheim Convention Center, my department did retro arcade, supplied the artwork and stuff for that, and so that's where I got to see some of these art objects come back into the light. And we would do an art gallery, we would do a charity auction, and we did the retro arcade, and then we moved the large sculptures that we had created of some of the characters. Those were things that were
That's
in
cool.
my department, my responsibility. So
Did you work
yeah,
with any of the artists?
well, I mean, I yeah, I don't know what you mean by work with, but I
Well,
talked
like
to
when
them
I think of
regularly.
Disney, I think the animators, they're somewhere else. So like if the designers, the artists that were coming up with game design artwork, were they working in the same building as the artwork that you're preserving?
Yeah, or the same group of buildings. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But
Oh,
that was true.
cool.
That was really true for Disney too. A lot of the time, I mean, I got to meet a lot of the artists,
Oh,
and
that's awesome.
our department at Disney would do an annual. They had a tradition where they would do for April Fool's Day a caricature art show where the artists drew each other, and then the department I work for was responsible for putting that up on display. So we would gather all the art first, and so we'd meet the artists when they were dropping off art. You know, I also met a lot of artists during the really dark period where we made the big push to digital, and they did a lot of layoffs.
Mm,
So we had, there were 3 studios: Orlando, Paris, and Burbank, and 2,500 artists or whatever it was, and then it was Burbank and 500 artists. It was,
wow.
you know, um,
Wow.
that was a rough period, but we were helping with portfolios for artists that were going to other places, and so I met a lot of artists in that period too. But
Oh, that's good. That's very helpful to have all of that. I don't know how many times people look back and they say, "Oh, I didn't save anything."
right,
Well, everything was saved. All the work
yeah,
they did was saved.
Disney tried to make that period as easy, and as they were trying to be as helpful to people regardless of whether they were staying or going as they could. I have to say, having been through a layoff from Blizzard later, and having worked all of my adult life, I know that that's not always the case, but they really did make an effort in trying to help people and set things up where people could succeed. And they, offered all kinds of training and opportunities. So even though
Wow.
it was a really rough time, I do have to give them props for that.
So before we go, right before we started recording the interview, you put up a virtual background. Can you put that up one more time? It was a setting of inside of a house. And I was hoping
Yeah.
you can explain why you decided that piece. What's the connection you have to that piece?
Well, I think it was this Rick and Morty one.
Right.
Um,
You're really blending in now.
yeah, the shirt really works well with this.
Okay, the
Yeah,
Rick and Morty.
no, I like Rick and Morty. I like a lot of animation. I watch animation, Um, yeah, I have a couple here, I think, on this machine from Rick and Morty. I have some, at home for my Zoom backgrounds. My grandfather was an art director for Universal, and one of the things that he worked on was the Brady Bunch house. So I have a Brady Bunch interior Zoom background.
Cool.
But yeah, no, what else? I have couple here. Let's see what else I have here. Uh, yeah, I think this is also Rick and Morty. Yeah.
See, I might be the only person that doesn't watch Rick and Morty.
All right.
I think I'm the
Um,
only.
yeah, but I mean, you have to have a little fun with the Zoom stuff, right? I mean, um, I picked one recently that I only use for special occasions. That's a painting of souls being tortured in hell, and
Mhm.
there's some meetings where that's the appropriate background, right?
Oh boy. By the way, I think background art's totally underrated.
Oh
It's
yeah,
awesome art, and people don't necessarily collect it unless they have the matching cell that goes on top of it.
yeah.
But the background art by itself is just fantastic, and people don't give it enough props.
No, I agree. I have so I have some art on my wall at home, right? And things that I purchased or been given over the years. And one of the things that I really like is I have a painting, a watercolor by an artist, Doug Ball, who worked on Tarzan. And I mean, he's a great painter. That's why they have that job, is they're amazing painters. And so, but I agree, there's some really beautiful work. And I have two shows in mind that I'd love to curate someday if I get the opportunity out of the Disney collection. One is I want to show background paintings that you wouldn't know were background paintings if you came into the museum and saw them on the wall. They would just
Wow.
look like landscapes, right? And I know that that material exists. And then the other one is I want to do a inspired by that show that I talked about, taking stuff to Paris for visual representations of music, because but I want to do it with concept art and story sketches, because some of the stuff for the Fantasia interstitials and the Fantasia 2000 interstitials are just incredibly beautiful, kind of abstract visions of what music looks like, and I think that would be a lot of fun. So
That's awesome.
I'm hoping I get the opportunity down the road.
Do it. How do you do it? Do you pitch it? Do you know the people still where you
I know,
can?
yeah, I could pitch it, but what I need to do first is make a list of the art that I want to request, right? So I need to have the time to sit down, put in the DVDs, watch through the film, pause it at the right time, be able to make the time reference when I make the request. I want the background that's at 3 minutes 35 seconds in this film, and that kind of thing, and or I want the concept art or story sketches that back up this part of the film. So, and I want it from these artists, and I can do the research. I can go through. There are some great books out there on Disney art, and I can go through and find that stuff. But
You could tell them the shelf number even if you
no, that
remember.
I don't remember anymore. No, it's been long enough, because you have to remember. So I left there, like you said, in 2006, November
Mhm.
2006. So it's been a while. I do miss it, but it was definitely a
In a
incredible,
little bit.
amazing opportunity. So
I got to say, this was a lot of fun and informative, and I think I've learned a lot. And I think there's so many people curious that collect really what it's like behind the scenes there, and I think this will be beneficial to a lot of people who watch it here. And wow, we've
I
been
hope I
going
didn't
over
give
an
away
hour.
any secrets I wasn't supposed to, but I hope, I'm glad if it was enjoyable.
Oh yeah, no, I very much so, and I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it. And I got to say, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you so much for doing this and joining us to talk about some of the secrets there, I guess, that will later get you in trouble.
Yeah, let's hope not. Well, I hope your audience is big enough to get me in trouble. How's that?
Timothy L. Campbell, everybody. I got to tell you, I have in my mind an idea of Walt Disney's animation art collection archives. And now in my mind, I think about how they redesigned the building just in case a tank was rolling down the street and decided to clip off part of it. Isn't that amazing? So they have so many thoughts and details that go into not only the design of the building, but then they also come up with their own methods of preservation. And the archiving is still continuing to this day, something that they thought would take a year or two, now continuing and ongoing just based on the sheer volume of art that's in the Disney archive. I am just thrilled that Tim gave us some time here to discuss some of that, his experiences working with them, even though it was some time ago, but still, I think a lot of those experiences still are relevant. And all the ideas and tips he gave us about preservation, just absolutely fantastic. So a big thank you to Timothy L. Campbell yet again. I'm Ryan Recker. Thanks for everyone that watches this YouTube channel. I think we're coming up on 100 subscribers, so that's not bad for a brand new channel. We just started doing these interviews not that long ago, and they said that at 100, we can have a custom name. So if you're watching this and have not subscribed yet, please do so. Then you'll get notifications or whatever in the future when we have these new videos, reminded for those. And, if you do like it, I do it just for fun, so I'm glad you like it. And actually, the reason I do it is I'm very selfish. I like having these conversations with people that otherwise wouldn't give me the time of day. And I like talking animation cells, and no one in my life wants to talk about it. I'm having to scour the internet to find friends to talk about this hobby. So a big thank you to Timothy there, and he actually stayed at work late to do this interview, so I'm very grateful for that. Hopefully we'll have some more videos up for you soon. In the meantime, have a great day. We'll see you.